Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One Year Bible. This week we're expanding on Sunday's sermon topic dealing with the end times. My name is Mizell, and today I'm joined by Sheryl, Daughety, and Justin Smith, and we're going to examine a text from John chapter 11, and I'm going to begin reading in verse 23. It says, Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day." And Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." So this is a famous story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Before Jesus performed this miracle, he had a conversation with Martha, the sister of Lazarus. And Jesus makes this incredible statement. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life." And Martha links his statement to her belief that Jesus was the promised Messiah. So how are these two ideas connected to each other, Justin?
Well, in the time of Jesus, most Jewish, especially Pharisees, believed in a future general resurrection. They believed in the final day, all the righteous people would be raised to life again. This was based on passages like Daniel 12:2, where it says, "Many of those whose bodies lie dead and buried will rise up, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting disgrace." While not everybody in the time believed in a resurrection, for example, the Sadducees, Martha would have likely held to the Pharisaic hope that resurrection was something God would do for all his people at the end of time. That's why Martha says in John 11:24, "He will rise when everyone else rises." Then Jesus makes that incredible statement, "I'm the resurrection and the life." He doesn't say, "I can perform resurrections." He says the resurrection is a person, and it's him.
Right. So, Cheryl, do you think Martha completely understood the statement that he makes?
I'm not sure that she could possibly understand the statement that he was making, because it reframes the timeline and the source of the resurrection power. And we look back on it now and we understand that the resurrection is not just a distant day to come, but it was Jesus himself. And the resurrection was there then, right in front of her. But it does seem like Martha made a theological leap between the coming resurrection age and the coming of the Messiah. And some Jewish expectations of the Messiah included the idea that he would usher in the resurrection age or have the power to defeat death. So if Jesus is claiming that he is resurrection itself, then Martha must have believed, then you have to be the Messiah. And even more than the theological connection, Jesus challenged Martha to a personal declaration of her own faith. Jesus is essentially saying, "Do you believe that resurrection isn't just a doctrine, but that it's found in me?" And her response indicates her faith in Jesus, both as Messiah and as the Son of God.
Yeah, I think that's an important observation to make. There are a lot of things none of us understand about how the end is going to look, what end times look like. And so, just like Martha, our faith has to rest in the person of Jesus. We place our faith in him. And even while we may not completely understand the details of the future, we can still trust, that he has our best interest at heart. So why should we study end time events?
I think it's important to understand how it will happen as best as we can by what we've been told about what's going to happen, but I don't think that we should feel worried or obsessed over it, about recognizing every detail or exactly how it's going to unfold for the reason that you just stated, which is either we trust him or we don't.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when it happens, it's going to happen, and there's nothing that we can do to control any of it. So we do have to trust that Jesus is going to do for us what he has said he is.
I think just to be somewhat aware of what is somewhat expected and to be able to recognize the signs that Scripture points us to of Christ coming again is, but I agree with what you said. Not knowing it, I don't think is expected. I feel like it's okay to not fully grasp and understand, because I don't think he intends for us to.
I have minimal interest in things like the end times. Some of that's just my personality. The way I describe it is I settled in my mind that Jesus is coming again. Now my obligation is to do everything I can until either I die or that happens. But now I have some friends who are, I don't know, way too deep, But I think sometimes my experience is anybody that is overly consumed by a single subject is often a little weird for me anyway, because if that's the thing, I said on this podcast before, I have a friend, he's, I don't know, 10-ish years older than I am. He's a pastor. And he has some significant gifts that I don't have, but I have never heard him preach a sermon that the end times and the rapture did not get mentioned. It may not have been the thrust of it, but it was in it, and that's, if he makes Facebook posts, that's all he posts about, and, but I also don't think that's an excuse to be ignorant. I think we have to be careful that we say, okay, we're not supposed to know, so we're not supposed to care. That's not, those aren't two things aren't the same. If we don't understand all the details of end times events, does it weaken our faith, do you think?
I don't think that God's, as we already mentioned, I don't think he's given us the mental capacity to understand it all. So I don't think that it weakens our faith not knowing. I think that the curiosity of it all gives us the hope that there's something better to come for those who believe. And it'll be so good that we can't even fathom what it'll be like with the current mindset that he's given us.
I personally don't have to read very much of Revelation to see that I can't comprehend a lot of it, not fully. And I do again think that we have to trust God to do for us then what he does for us now. We have to trust that he is going to make sure that his will happens, and we're obviously involved in that, and we have to trust that he still loves us and still wants good for us and still has a purpose for us in his plan.
If you only talk about Revelation, like that is, it probably is my least favorite book of the Bible. But it some of that is, I don't even enjoy movies or books that are written in that mythological, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a word.
Alliteration, maybe?
Yeah, well,
Sci-fi.
Yeah, those things. I don't like. I know you've watched all the Star Wars movies. I've never watched one ever. We've had this conversation on here before. It doesn't mean that it's not real. It's there for a reason. And he was speaking to an audience that would have understood those kind of things. And I don't think lack of understanding should weaken our faith. It should increase our faith, in my opinion. Because you have to trust that he's going to do what he says. So what does it mean to you to say Jesus is the resurrection and the life? What does it mean to you?
It means to me that he didn't just come to teach us about how to live a godly life or teach us about the resurrection that was to come, that he was the actual provision of that for us. And that he is how we find true life. I think that that's what it means by him being the life. And that he is what actually makes resurrection possible because of who he is and because of his sacrificial death. That he wasn't just telling us of what was to come, that he was the very thing that we needed.
Yeah, I said that, Jesus is the only example of a living sacrifice, and his death on the cross and raising from the dead 3 days later is the foundation of our faith, that we may have eternal life through him. He is that example.
This concept of the resurrection, always been in my understanding and my knowledge, and I wouldn't say it is my thoughts about at least my own personal resurrection has changed, but I think over the last couple of years, I have come to understand how central this concept of resurrection is to our faith, and that without it, right, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then I have no hope to rise from the dead, and the gospel is irrelevant, frankly. And so when we talk about Jesus being the resurrection and life, we have to, that is where all of our hope lies for eternity, is if he's not, right, we're doomed. There's a guy, I started to give some qualification, but I'm not. And I've seen his faith morph or wane or change over the last, I don't know, I've known him, I guess, for 20-ish years. And one of the last conversations I remember having with him about faith was, he said, the one thing that I hope is true is the resurrection, right? Some of the things that he once believed, I don't think he believes anymore. But he said, I hope that the resurrection is true, because everything else hinges on it. And there's a lot of, if Jesus is not the resurrection of life, everything else fails. So.
Yeah. Paul describes it as him being like the first of a great harvest that Jesus was, and that we're all to follow. And he says, like, if none of this is true, then it's all wasted.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.